Humanianity, a new religious call. Humanianity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be.
Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is Humanianity Conversation number 80, recorded on October 9, 2020. It is the 37th recorded conversation with my friend Mike. We continued our effort to work toward agreement with regard to our basic belief systems, both of which are significantly different than that which is normal about certain basic issues. We continue to have disagreement about the appropriateness or utility of having a concept of reality that is independent of or outside of our subjective experience, that is, the question of solipsism. We seem to be getting a little closer to agreement, but we are not there yet. Right.
Okay, so last time we were, I think what we were talking about last time was I had proposed that we had reached an impasse, and I had proposed that we start discussing some more esoteric terms that exist that may not be generally known, but that would help us to come to agreements and just communicate more effectively, and I think more accurately and more consistently on the topics that we're talking about. And you had said that sounded like a good idea, but we need to discuss the definitions and come to an agreement on exactly what they were. Does that still sound like a plan?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So the words based on our discussions that I think would probably be most helpful is the word phenomenal, noumenal, qualia, and a priori and posteriori. I think those 5 terms, we keep kind of like bumping into them during our discussions and using stand-in words like reality or subjective experience. And there are philosophers that have gotten much more specific besides those popular words, those common words that we've been using. So you want to do you have any that you could think of besides the 5 that I suggested?
Uh, well, after our last, and by the way, we were going to mention that unfortunately, the last conversation I did not record. I thought I was recording it.
Oh, that's right. Oh,
Yeah.
too bad. That was okay. Well, that's what happened last time.
Yeah. But so yeah, you kind of summarized it where we got that there's some terms that you're wanting to use, and by the way, I probably looked up the wrong one. Numinous is what I said. You're saying noumenal, but
Yeah.
noumenal has to do, it's a religious term meaning the divine. And so I didn't know whether I'd probably just, numinous was not the right one. You could see
Yeah.
noumenal is what you meant.
Uh,
But at any rate, yeah, one of the problems is that when we start outsourcing, when we start using terms that have do not have any meaning for other people, and we say, well, it's what Kant was talking about or something like that, then that's outsourcing everything, and then the conversation becomes hopeless at that point, what we need to make sure is that you and I actually know what we are referring to and are in agreement about what we are referring to. So, and I
Yeah.
think that's what we were planning to do.
Yeah, I
Uh,
agree. I agree. I think, I don't want to, I don't think it's helpful for us to get into a discussion, what did Kant mean by this and what did Heidegger mean by that? And
right.
that's not, I don't think I could fully understand what Kant meant by these words. But however, the concepts I think would be very helpful.
Okay.
Um,
And
so
I'm a,
actually,
and
go ahead.
I'm a little bit doubtful,
Okay.
but
So
let's see.
let's start with it's actually noumenal. And I don't really even know how to pronounce it. It's the root word is noumenon as opposed to phenomenon.
Uh-huh.
And you've heard me talk about, your phenomenology. I've said that in this discussion several times before. And I've used as a stand-in kind of subjective experience. So the idea that the phenomenal world, coded so to speak, the phenomenal and subjective experience is somewhat similar, not exactly, but
How is it not exactly similar?
it's not exactly similar because in in because it doesn't really subjective experience has no opposite, whereas phenomenal does. So we can talk about two terms, phenomenal and noumenal. So noumenal is the opposite of phenomenal. It's the opposite of subjective experience. It's everything that exists outside of one's subjective experience. Now, we've been using the term reality to refer to that, but the problem is what I found happens is that we
Oh,
sometimes,
yeah, exactly. No, no.
okay, and incorrectly, I think we've been using that term.
Well, wait. No. One of the problems is that you are familiar with the book that I wrote on the mind-body problem, which is available on the website under philosophy and free. And in that, I discuss these things in great detail and try to be pretty specific about them. And it made use of it came to a conclusion about what we could say about reality. In other words, we had the subjective experience, and then the model of that, the subjective model being our whole set of beliefs about and perceptions of and so forth, of quote reality. And then there's the objective model. The subjective model is everything that we experience. It's what I think you're referring to as phenomenology.
Phenomenal, right? Phenomenon, right?
Phenomenal, you know. And then the objective model is what we uh, acquire that can stand in conflict with the subjective model. And it's those sets of beliefs that we acquire by virtue of our interaction with other people and what other people tell us about things that we couldn't possibly um, have any thoughts about otherwise. Um, to give an example, we take a look at the wall, and obviously that's a hard object sitting in front of us and everything. And that's, by obviously, I mean that's what is in our subjective experience. We can run against the wall and find we can't, that something unusual happens and so forth. Uh, and or usual. We learn that you can't go through a wall and so on. And so that is our perception of and belief about the wall in our
Right.
subjective experience. Um, so that's the subjective model. The objective model is the one that we acquire where people say, well, that's not exactly the way it is. That's the way it seems, but that's not the way it is. And the way it is it's mostly empty space made of quarks and electrons and so forth, which are like nothing that we can actually imagine because they are not like anything that is in our subjective experience. And so we develop even mathematical models um, and of reality. But the only evidence we have for reality is that we can predict and we can make predictions, and often they are correct, but sometimes they are incorrect. And what we mean by incorrect is that, well, what I predicted was such and such, but what actually happened was so and so. And that implies that um, the nature of what I'm dealing with is different than what I had imagined it to be. And so we have the so um, all of our perceptions of and beliefs about reality are models of reality, but reality itself is not anything we can know anything about other than um, our the what other than our ability to make predictions and to be either correct or incorrect. And now, so that's really kind of not a real good summary, I think, of the position that I came to in the writing of the book. And when you went through the book the first time, you seemed to agree with everything, but I think there are disagreements somewhere in there.
Yeah.
At any rate, so now let's go to um, phenomenon, phenomenal. Is that anything different than just what you are experiencing? Is it does it include your beliefs about what you are experiencing?
Correct.
It is.
So your subjective yes, subjective experience and phenomenal, they are, I would peg them to be, the way we're using them, they could be considered the same. Now the
Okay.
issue is that
Well, wait, subjective experience, but then we have beliefs about that subjective experience, and that's in that totality called the subjective model.
no, if the if the hierarchy you are proposing is subjective model, then subjective experience.
No, I don't know what you mean by hierarchy.
So it seems like you are separating beliefs. So let me ask you a quick question. Are your beliefs about something inside your subjective experience?
It's a little bit worrisome because that could mean somewhat different things. But let's be more concrete. I take a look at a bottle of liquid sitting in front of me. So in my subjective experience, I am seeing that bottle. I have some beliefs about it, that it contains a particular liquid that tastes a particular way, and that it has been, and that I got it from the grocery store.
Okay.
So,
So it sounds like, I think, you would characterize your beliefs about a subjective experience as separate from the experience itself.
well, not exactly. No, as I point out in the book, when I am looking at the bottle, I am, and seeing the bottle there, I am believing that it is there also. So there is not a clear dividing line between one's perception of something and one's beliefs about the perception. But there are beliefs about the perception that are certainly not included in the actual perception itself. But on the other hand, as one is seeing that bottle, one is believing that the bottle is, quote, there. So that would be a belief.
But this is important because this might be one of the reasons why we need to introduce another term, phenomenal. So the phenomenal would include not just the subjective experience, but your beliefs about the subjective experience.
Okay, well, as I point out in the book, that whole thing then can be called the subjective model. And in that way, then it really includes the perceptions of and imaginations of such and such, memories of such and such. It
Emotions are part of the subjective model.
No, I think an emotion would be something that would be perceived within one's subjective experience. Now, the thing is, emotion is usually associated with some belief, perhaps not always, but
Okay, I might be seeing a mapping here then.
uh-huh.
So phenomenal is the subjective model, qualia is the subjective experience, I think. We haven't gotten to qualia yet.
Uh-huh.
But so would you say that subjective experience, well, please, can you describe what you mean by subjective experience versus the subjective model? Can you contrast the two?
Well, they can't be completely contrasted because, as I just pointed out, when one is looking at the bottle and seeing it, they are believing that the bottle is there. And so, see, a more fundamental term in the mind-body problem book introduced earlier is that of model. And model is anything that can be used anything, the characteristics of which can be used to predict something about that which is being modeled.
Say that one more time. Can predict anything about that which is being modeled. Say it one more time.
Okay. A model is anything, the characteristics of which can be used to predict something about that which is being modeled.
Right.
So I use the example of the rock sitting in mud, the mud dries, and somehow the rock falls out, is knocked out or is removed. However, then one can say that the surface of the rock is a model of the impression in the mud, and the impression in the mud is a model of the surface of the rock. And then we have linguistic models and so forth. But at any rate, one's perception of something is a model of that which exists in reality.
Okay.
And so, I give the example of looking at a cartoon. We're looking at a cartoon, and there are two people looking at an object, let's say a bottle. And over the head of each individual is a balloon that we customarily use either for what the person is saying or what the person is thinking or seeing. And in this case, we're using it to depict what the person is seeing. And so over the head of each of those two individuals is a balloon within it, a bottle, but the bottle is slightly different in the two balloons. And it's different from the bottle that we are seeing as we look at the cartoon. Okay, as we look at the so there are three bottles. There's the bottle, and there are the two bottles in the two balloons. And what we currently believe is that what happens is that light bounces off of the bottle in reality, and so becomes light waves that enter the eye and become nerve impulses, and then from somewhere it becomes a conscious experience. Okay, just a second. So each person's model of the bottle is somewhat different than the bottle itself, has to be different in all respects. So therefore, the bottle in reality is different. It's just being modeled by our perceptions of and beliefs about the bottle. Yeah, go ahead.
So you use the word reality in there as just an assumption, but I don't want to go there yet, because I feel that in order to do so, I need a word that, see, there's something in the subjective model and subjective experience have something in common. It's only happening inside a person's mind. And I need a container. I need a word in order to communicate these ideas. I need a word for that.
Well, you've already used the word mind and inside. That's the container, not anything that has ever been observed.
Okay, well, that's because it's a priori. We haven't gotten to a priori yet. But all right, so let me use different terms, different words then to communicate this idea. I need a word that can communicate the idea that the subjective model and the subjective experience see, this is the problem because you have no word for this. That's why I need to introduce the term. I need to introduce a term, and that's phenomenal. And the phenomenal encompasses the subjective model and subjective experience.
Well, see, subjective model is what I use in the book. So the subjective model includes the perceptions of things as well as the beliefs about those things.
Okay, but you said it doesn't include things like emotions, right? Because you had said before,
yes.
Well, maybe it does. So could you say let's
No, wait. Let's clarify that I said that emotions are in the subjective experience. Yes.
okay. So
subjective experience is everything that we experience.
okay. So let me see if I can introduce the term as an opposite then, because you are. No, actually, it's not really. All right, then let me go here. Where does the subjective model and subjective experience occur?
Where?
From a person's point of view, okay, how does yeah, I mean, where is a good word? So I'm sitting here right now. I can describe where I am, where I feel like I am. I am, in a sense, in here. I feel like Zeus, my dog, is outside there. I can feel that there's something I call reality out there.
Well, now
So,
I think there was a confusion there between your use of the word I and the use of the word out there.
See, that's why we don't have terms to talk about this. That's why we keep bumping into these ideas.
I think we do, but it may be that I'm not understanding something. But I don't think that you and I have the belief that there's an entity that I have not named. But it sounds like
I may think that. I think there might be a few you haven't named. I'm three specifically: phenomenal, noumenal, and qualia. I don't know if you have names for those entities in your philosophy.
Well, what does qualia mean?
I don't think we can't talk about qualia until we talk about phenomenal, because the qualia is a subset of the phenomenal. So you need to have a term before we even talk about qualia.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a term for what you object to, which would be the mind, which would even, let me try to use a different word. In your from what I think I understand from what you're saying more specifically now. Let me check this out first. When you say subjective model, is there an opposite? Is there something that's not the subjective model?
This is a somewhat difficult concept, but not impossible, I think. I use a visual analogy that we have this sphere, let's say. This mass has a certain shape, and we'll just say that it's somewhat spherical. And then a bump appears on the surface, a little bump, and it starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so that ultimately you have a big mass here and a big mass here, but they're connected where the second big mass began appearing. So it's not as if there are two separate entities.
Okay.
The contents of each being either in one entity or the other. It's not that way. There would be between the subjective model and the objective model would be an area where you could say it's in both.
In both what?
Models, where you could say that a particular thing was in both.
That's not okay. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that when you're talking about these ideas in the third person, I'd like you to talk about them in the first person. So from when I'm sitting here experiencing you and everything around me, what is the difference experientially between the subjective model and the objective model?
Well, when you are looking at me and seeing me and doing what you would call perceiving me, that is your subjective experience. Your beliefs that actually I'm mostly empty space and consisting of things called electrons and quarks and force fields and so forth. That whole set of beliefs is in the objective model. It's in your.
Yeah, but I'm asking you to describe it experientially. How do I experience the objective and how do I experience the subjective model? What is that experience?
Well, the subjective model.
Or are they different? Are the experiences different?
When you look at me, you're seeing, quote, a person there, and you have all sorts of beliefs about that person and so forth. When you are looking at your objective model beliefs, that I am really electrons and protons and neutrons, mostly in empty space, you are imagining things. You are trying to imagine protons, neutrons, and electrons like little billiard balls or something else. So you're using material from your subjective experience to construct and model the beliefs arrived at by this process of developing much more accurate
Okay.
and usable for special purposes beliefs that are in the objective model.
Yes, and you got very granular with in terms of what the differences between those experiences. And I would agree, but I wasn't speaking about so granular. At the experience. I'm not. I don't. Let me just get right to it. I am not seeing the objective model interacting with the subjective model. I am not. It is not.
No.
It is not differentiated between myself and other. There is nothing. It is experienced as, I don't want to use the word I just want to say now I'm bumping into the word a priori, which is another term I need to start using. But let me try to not use the term. So there's something else that those two experiences have in common. Okay, both those, the subjective model and the objective model is experienced and I'm bumping into a priori, so it's not, what I'm going to say is not going to make any sense because we haven't discussed that term yet. Both of those, the subjective model and the objective model, is happening to me. It's happening in, for lack of a better word, my mind.
Yeah, but then,
and there needs to be, and don't object to the use of the word the mind. We've never experienced it. The reason why there's that belief is because we haven't discussed a priori yet. Okay. I can explain that, but we have to get to a priori, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's a reason why you can't experience the mind. It's a priori, but versus posteriori, you can't experience it. However, that is still the experience that I would propose and I would posit everybody would describe to happen on the planet Earth. Every human being who's capable of understanding this would say, no, this objective model and the objective model happens inside of me. It's part of me. It's here. It's in my mind. Now, there needs to be a word. I don't think there is one to communicate that fact. That it's both happening inside a structure, for lack of a better word, the mind. Kant would say, it's not called the mind, it's called the phenomenal. So that's why I think we need to introduce that term. Yeah,
but the problem is that just making up a word doesn't mean that we brought a new entity into exist, or that we now are talking about a new experience. We can make up words all the time.
Yes, but well, the subjective model and the objective model are also made up words, but they're made up words to communicate an idea.
They are defined.
That's what we're trying to do here. So there is another idea that needs to be communicated on a regular basis during our discussions that we don't have a word for. We don't have a word to communicate the idea that the subjective model and the objective model are experienced in certain from a certain point of view identically. It's experienced in my, for lack of a better word, in the mind. We need a word for that. You could use the word the mind, but that's very problematic because it means lots of different things.
Well, there is I see a kind of a problem here with regard to the use of my terminology and some difference in your use of it is somewhat different than mine, slightly.
Mhm.
Remember that a model is just a model, and what we're saying is that one's perception of something is a model of it, and one's beliefs about it is a model of it. That we have beliefs which are essentially predictions, lists of predictions. The bottle of liquid that I see, I believe contains a certain kind of liquid that has a particular taste. I'm not tasting that right now. But if my belief is accurate, then I will not be surprised when I take a swallow of that liquid. It will taste as predicted. So, the fundamental idea here is that of prediction, and that's, remember, going back to the description of the model. It's anything, the characteristics of which allow you to predict the characteristics of that which is being modeled.
Right. And the difference of usage may be there, and it may be slight. I would acknowledge that, but I don't think it has any bearing on what I'm claiming is needed for us to communicate some of these ideas. That we need to have, and we need to have a word that communicates the idea that the subjective model and the objective model is experienced by people similarly, and what most people would describe, for lack of a better word, the mind. And we can't use the word mind because there are so many multiple meanings of that. We need a word. Oh, Bill? Bill? Just froze.
Okay, there you are.
There you, okay. I got you. So we need a word to communicate that, because that's really, that is, at this point, it's almost synonymous with the ideas I'm talking about. It's critical. It's integral. We need a word for that. Oh no! I did I lose you?
Yeah, I was not able. You froze, and I didn't hear anything for a second or two.
I had said that. Yeah, I'm already on low quality for my camera. Oh well. I said that, it is getting to the point. It's so critical. It's integral to I feel, to the ideas that I need to I need a word for that to communicate, to get to future ideas that I'm building on, which all relate back to solipsism, by the way.
You seem to be well, this is not entirely accurate, I guess, but at times it seems like you're trying to locate your subjective experience somewhere.
Right, because that is absolutely, that is the way it is experienced. And when you are kind of solipsist in nature or phenomenologist, you understand and communicate things not from some imaginary third person point of view. You communicate and understand things always from the first person point of view, because that's the only point of view that exists, is what's happening inside what I experience to be inside, again, for lack of a better word, my mind, inside my phenomenal, inside the qualia is the only thing that exists
What
from
is
a
that?
solipsist point of view. And we need words,
What is outside of it?
the noumenal. That's why we have to get into these words. So the subjective, so here's where I would communicate. So what I would say is that the subjective model and the subjective model, the subjective experience is kind of, in a sense, in a container of the subjective model, which is synonymous and shared with the objective model. And then within that,
No, that's
there
not.
is,
Oh no, they're not synonymous.
not synonymous. Well, you had said, no, it's not, I said in a sense synonymous, because there are times when something can kind of like share both the objective and the subjective. That's what I meant. So within that, there's that all happens in the phenomenal. And the phenomenal is separate from the noumenal. So there's noumenal, phenomenal, inside phenomenal, subjective model, objective model. Inside of subjective model is subjective experience. But what's so important to me in these ideas, I want to communicate that all of that still happens in the phenomenal. It's not the noumenal. That's the mistake I think you keep. That's what I hear keeps happening. That I want to bring this up. There's an assumption made that the subjective model and the objective model is somehow referencing the noumenal. It's not. It's still within the phenomenal. That's so important.
What do you mean referencing?
It is that somehow the objective model reflects something in the noumenal world. It's still reflecting. It's still in the phenomenal.
Now, what do you mean reflecting?
It's measuring. It is for lack of a better word. What seems to happen is the idea is you take a measurement. You take a measurement of something outside the phenomenal, and that becomes data that you use to kind of whatever shape your beliefs and shape your experience.
Well, no, that's not what I would say. That gets into a later chapter in the Mind Body Problem book on measurement, the objective model measurement, and but there's a whole lot of stuff in between that's kind of being left out. So I think what's happening is you are partially adopting my terminology and way of looking at things, but then kind of mixing it with your prior way of looking at things.
No, I've heard you say in this conversation,
Okay.
you've said, you've referenced reality. You've said things like, there are three bottles. There's the bottle in mind A, the model in mind B, and then there's the real bottle. You've used, and we can take measurements of that real bottle to make predictions about that real bottle, and on the basis of those predictions, make some assumptions about the actual existence of that bottle.
But the measurement is occurring within one's subjective experience.
Well, that's true, but the idea that I'm trying to communicate is that because that, okay, then let's talk about it this way, make it use your terms. Now I'm going to use your terms. If the measurement is happening inside your subjective experience, what it is, what I would argue is that it is measuring your subjective experience. It's not, it's still happening in the phenomenal. It's not, you're using, basically you could think of the measurement as an extension of your subjective experience. It's not an interface to the subjective, to the noumenal world. It's not an interface to reality. The measuring stick doesn't let you in any way kind of directly connect to what's outside your phenomenal. It extends the phenomenal, but it's still measuring the phenomenal. It's still measuring. It's still happening inside. It's happening inside your mind, for lack of a better word.
See, there's a whole lot that's being left out that I talk about with regard to measurement. And it has to do with the repeatability of it and the ability of it to be pointed to and have other individuals in your subjective experience say, yes, I see it, and yes, I get the same results, and so on. But it's an awful lot to put into just 2 or 3 sentences.
I recall those things from the book, but even so, and even with these very specific differences between how I'm relaying your ideas, the main argument and the main claim that I'm making, that we need to use a word to communicate the idea, that's a subjective model and the objective model, is experientially, its experience as being contained in something. We need a word for that, and there is none.
But it's not that to talk about a container, that is using our imagination and constructing an entity that is there by definition only.
Well, it's because it's a priori. You can experience it. We haven't gotten there yet. That's my point.
You can or cannot.
The whole idea.
Can or cannot.
You cannot. It's a priori. You cannot experience your own experience. Your experience a priori.
Okay,
Itself is a priori.
I'm worried about this a priori.
Well, we haven't gotten there yet, but I think we need to first, I mean, maybe we should start at a priori then, because
we try.
There needs to be, I am kind of crippled in my ability to communicate certain ideas, because there really aren't any words for the entity that I'm talking about and the ideas that I'm talking about, which are they are synonymous with solipsism. And for me not to be able to use these 5 words, it's like, somebody trying to communicate a recipe and they can't use the word food or ingredients. It's like, how are you going to do that? You know what I mean? So it's really, it's kind of, that's why I keep hitting against these ideas. So we need to have some work for them.
But these new terms may contain concepts that are not included in what I would present as the mind-body problem way of thinking about things, with subjective model, objective model, and reality being the tripartite model.
I would think so, and I think that's one of the things I think that I might be claiming. I might be claiming that you're missing an entity. And that entity is the phenomenal. Now, I think reality might be synonymous with noumenal, but I've heard it being used in kind of, it could be synonymous, but I think if I'm a little concerned that if there's some differences between the word noumenal and reality, because reality, anyway, I don't want to get into it. It's a whole nother conversation, but we need entities so I think there are some entities missing. Noumenal is definitely missing. I don't know about qualia, maybe qualia.
I think the
phenomenal is definitely missing.
I think the simplest and most understood or understandable term is reality.
No.
You're
not
saying,
in the way. Here's why. Well, here's a couple of reasons why.
okay,
Reality could mean, and I've heard us slip into the colloquial term of it.
like your
Reality,
reality and my reality. Yeah,
right?
that's
It, it,
modern corruption of the term.
it
Yeah.
could be my reality, your reality. It could mean everything outside the subjective model. It could mean everything else. It could be.
See, I'm very specific about that in the book.
I know you might be specific in the book, but during the conversations, we're slipping. We're slipping into other ways of using it.
Right.
So if you use the word noumenal, that means one thing and only one thing.
Okay, what does it mean?
It means everything, and you don't have a word. This I think is a separate thing. You claim there is nothing. I think I understand what you're saying, other than your subjective experience.
No.
Right. So you think that there is, what's the opposite of subjective experience? It's not objective experience. It's reality, right?
Well, there's a problem using the term opposite because opposite implies that there is some kind of a continuum with two ends and maybe a missing middle, but that's not at least so far in my mind a way that I would conceptualize reality. Reality, we have only one, and here I always have some difficulty choosing good terminology. We only have one indicator that there is such a thing, and that is the ability to predict and the ability to be either correct or incorrect.
Right. So the noumenal is everything that is happening outside of human perception. Maybe you could use that word. Maybe you use that as a definition. And that's the only thing it means. You can't say, well, you can't confuse when I say something is real to mean it's part of the noumenal, because something when you say something is real, my emotions are real, but that's not part of the noumenal world. That's the phenomenal.
Okay.
So the phenomenal is everything that happens inside it, the phenomenal encompasses all of human perception. The objects of senses.
Okay, here's a problem though. Behind your head is a headrest. You cannot perceive it. Now, is that, when you think about what is in the noumenal world, do you imagine that headset?
This is the question itself. This is something that happens in almost every statement you're making. And very often, maybe not every statement, but very often, you automatically make an assumption. And this is what I'm trying to communicate. There is just this implicit idea that is in every, it's like an implicit foundation of the whole perspective, that behind me is a headrest. But the headrest doesn't exist until you just said it.
Exist for you.
It's my point.
That's the tricky part, and that's where postmodernism comes in.
It has nothing to do with postmodernism. This has to do with phenomenal, noumenal, and qualia, and a priori.
Well, wait. See the words "for me." The question is, um, is there something that is not included in what is your quote for me end quote?
Everything is for me. You can't, it's impossible for it not to be. How I think you're feeling that you're sitting behind the computer, that the computer's here in the noumenal. It's all it is all happening inside. It is all part of my phenomenon. That's all that exists. Now, in order for me to communicate with you, there have to be certain assumptions made. I'm not claiming that. But if we're going to be talking about solipsism, the basis of solipsism, the basis of phenomenology, there has to, I have to be able to communicate the idea that all that exists
For you,
for anybody, even when you say for you, that's a misnomer.
are there
It's
other
all that exists. It's, when you say here, let me give you why reason why. When you say for you, you automatically assume the other, and you
right?
can't do that. So I need an idea. I need a word that communicates that everything is happening. That I got bumping into the mind again. It's a priori. So that everything that is happening can only be understood properly. I would argue. I haven't gotten there yet. From a first person point of view, because that's the only point of view that exists. You can imagine others and you can assume others, but it doesn't actually exist.
Are you making the assumption that there are no other people than you?
I think it's you have to just, what do you mean by people?
Human beings?
In if I had the words, I believe at least, if I had the terms a priori, posteriori, qualia, noumenal, and phenomenal, and I took you through an argument, no, you could not see, you could not assume anything. The only thing you can assume is the self, is I. You can only assume that was a priori. In a sense, you can only, and by assume, I'm assuming that you mean be sure of. Is that what you mean by assume? I can be sure. I can only be sure of something that's a priori.
No, by assume, that would be anything, any belief or any proposition that was being accepted currently for the purposes intended as being something that does not need to be questioned.
Well, I agree with everything you said up to the end when you said does not need to be questioned.
Well, that doesn't mean that it cannot be questioned. That I would say that we can question it, yes.
Oh, because the last part you said does not have to be questioned.
For the purposes of
No.
the discussion is taking place.
Oh, for the purpose of this discussion, I think the only thing that does not have to be discussed is the idea of self, of consciousness. Let me use that word better.
Oh boy.
Consciousness is the only thing that can't be questioned.
Yeah, okay. Oh no, I think that's very questionable, and the self would be very problematic. That's a concept that we use loosely, very effectively.
Well, that's why I changed it to consciousness. And, the idea behind that is, I maintain, I think it could argue, and this has to do with posteriori. Everything that is posteriori is subject to your senses in one form or another, or your qualia in one form or another. And as such, you can't be sure of it because you can't experience the object directly. The only thing you can experience directly is something that's a priori. And that's by definition. I mean,
So when you experience an hallucination, that hallucination is true by a priori.
Thoughts are not a priori. Thoughts happen. You can experience your thoughts. You can experience a hallucination.
Hallucination, yeah, is not a belief. I'm not talking about delusion.
Right. You can experience. So if I'm having an auditory hallucination or visual hallucination, I'm experiencing that.
Uh-huh.
So there's space in there, so to speak. There is an opportunity for me to think about it, question it, examine it. It's happening experientially. It's happening posteriori. Something that's the opposite of that, something that's a priori, you can't get a reference point to experience it. It's not possible. That is the only thing you can confidently assume exists.
Can you say that
accurately, the way you're experiencing it?
Can you say that again?
Which part?
The whole thing that you were saying, a priori. You were saying what a priori is.
I maintain anything that you can experience. For example, hallucination. You're seeing hallucination. You can experience it, which means there's the opportunity for you to think about it, debate it, question it. You can get kind of a reference point. You can, in a sense, differentiate yourself of it. There's you having an experience. That's the phenomenon. That's the phenomenon of it. That's the way it's experienced. You can't be sure that what you're experiencing is in any way accurate because it is an experience. Mm-hmm. And it's open to interpretation, even in your own, just in your own opinion.
What does that mean? What does that mean, accurate?
Reflective of the noumenal, reflective of, I don't want to use the word reality, reflective of anything other than your perception of it.
Why not use reality there?
Because reality won't, because it's not accurate enough. It is accuracy in this sense means you can only be sure of what you are, of what your perception is telling you, not what in any way, anything other than that.
But you can't be sure of that.
That's what I'm saying. You can't.
Uh-huh.
Your perception can't be sure of it. Now, the only thing you can be sure of,
okay,
are those things which you, to even use the word experience them directly is a misnomer. They're experienced a priori. That they're not even experienced. They are. They are. I have to use the word experience because I can't use the word. I haven't communicated the idea of a priori yet. They are. You cannot differentiate the experience into an object separate from you. I don't experience my consciousness. I am it. As opposed to I experience my sight. I experience thoughts.
You experience your sight.
Yes, I experience my sight.
Uh-huh.
That's certainly the way
I think
I see, I feel, I think. Now, if you were to say, so in a sense, there's the subject object that you're differentiating yourself. There's an I and there's an object. Okay. You can't do that with consciousness. Consciousness is a priori, it's outside of experience. That's the only thing you can be sure that what your perception is what it really is. Because it exists a priori. And now I claim this is not by definition only. I think this is a phenomenal reality. This is the way humans are built.
I think one problem is that the ratio of the number of words spoken by you and by me is very much in the direction of you having said a whole lot. And so, and yet there is disagreement in what we are saying to each other. But I go back. Let's take a look at something that we've covered in previous.
Can I ask a question before we do that? What did you think of what I said?
I can't follow a lot of what you're saying.
Wow.
Because
Okay.
you're using words that do not have clear meaning for me.
Okay.
But
Okay. So let's move on.
There was a time when I asked you, like, during this discussion between you and me, has your wife existed?
My wife came into existence right when I first thought about it. Before that time, absolutely not.
Okay.
Well, I shouldn't say that. What do you mean by existence? To even ask that, see, this is my point. To even ask that question assumes something that I won't grant because that's not appropriate. To even ask the question, did my wife exist? You can't pose the question without her existing.
Well, I can say, do unicorns exist? And they don't.
Of course they do. Of course they do. You can't use you cannot even.
Well, maybe they have been discovered and I just don't know it.
Well, that's the sort of thing. What do you mean by exist? See, that's my point. Okay, so if this is why we need to bring in the idea of noumenal,
well,
and we can't do it,
right? Because
let me just say, you are claiming, you are saying if the unicorn exists in reality, and that's irrelevant. What's relevant is, does the unicorn exist outside of the phenomenal, in the noumenal? Is a difference, and we have to start talking in that way.
well, but we haven't been able to identify what you mean by noumenal or a priori yet.
Well, I know, and yet it's.
And I would say that
it's difficult.
And I would say that included in those definitions are certain assumptions that you and I may differ about. But let's go back for a second here. Really important. prior to my saying anything about your wife did not exist,
What do you
except
see,
earlier today.
when you ask that question,
Uh-huh.
you are making an assumption. Firstly, you're doing lots of things here. You're taking a third person point of view that doesn't exist, and you are making an assumption of what existence means, that my wife's existence means something outside of the phenomenal, and it doesn't. I can't grant that anymore, because we got to. I feel this is critical for me to communicate the ideas that I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's something unusual that is happening here, or something that uh, where everything becomes blurred.
Let me try to be more specific. Maybe that'll help. Can I take the subjective experience? Can I take that when I said third person, you're taking a third person point of view? I could get more specific about that if you want. Would that help?
No, hold on just a minute. Let me try to.
Okay.
Um, I would maintain that that uh, that although one could question something philosophically, so to speak, and that's not a good statement about it, that uh, there are certain beliefs that we have that are just useful, in that if we believe otherwise,
Okay.
it ruins our life. And so what I'm getting into is that there's the question of how to live life. And one of the important things involved in living a a uh, a life that one would feel okay about is that one has the belief that there are others other than oneself,
Okay. I could pose a counter to that.
and that they do not go out of existence just because I'm no longer thinking about them or perceiving them.
It's still taking a third person point of view.
Yeah.
That
Okay. Wait. So that third, what you are meaning by third person point of view is indeed a belief. I think it makes a difference what we believe. And we can believe things that lead to tragedy. We can believe things that almost nobody else could believe, and so forth. And that it makes a difference what we believe.
yes.
And so there are certain beliefs that one could philosophically question, but with bad results, if one really developed an alternative belief. In other words,
Right.
belief was not so. And the belief that there are other individuals that have a separate, quote, existence from me
Okay.
is an important belief to assume, but one could assume that nobody else exists except myself. I could assume that, but I think it would be an unhealthy assumption, and it would cut me off from important things in life.
You're mischaracterizing. I think you're straw manning my argument to a certain degree.
Okay,
That's yeah.
when somebody, when you're not thinking about somebody,
Well,
like
let me respond to that.
please let me finish.
Go ahead.
When you're not thinking about your father, does he exist or not?
To even ask the question.
See, this is something you can't.
No, you can't. It's kind of like trying to say 2 + 2 = 6. What do you think? Even the question is nonsense. You can't even ask the question, does my father exist, without him existing.
Yeah,
You have to communicate. You have to be more specific what you mean by existence. And I'm not going to let you straw man my argument here and my claim. So let me do a counter rebuttal on what you just said. Beliefs definitely really matter, very much so.
Mhm.
And in the same way, somebody can pervert a solipsist point of view into thinking that nobody exists and I can do whatever I want, including killing people and hurting people. You could also pervert the opposite point of view, that other people exist, I want what they have, and I'm going to hurt them and kill them to get what I want. So beliefs, the utility of beliefs, and whether they generate good or bad, ethical or unethical outcomes, are not dependent upon the ideas themselves. It depends upon how they're acted upon. So,
but can I?
That's a straw man argument.
Very important, because I think what you just did is what would be defined as a straw man argument.
Maybe I didn't understand what you were saying.
Because my belief that there are other people than myself existing, whether I think about them or not, does not include the belief that it is okay for me to do whatever I want to with them.
True, granted. So then what is the objection to, then what is the objection to, it seemed like that's where you were going, and maybe I read something into that. So when you said beliefs matter in response to the idea that, of course, my father didn't exist, where are you going with that? Like, okay, so now what? So, okay, beliefs matter. It doesn't necessarily, if you're not really my father cannot exist unless I'm thinking about him. It's impossible, because all that exists is phenomenal. This is the point.
Well, that right there, I think, is not a very easily defendable proposition.
I think it's very defendable.
Yeah. Well, I think that the problem is probably with the very problematic word exist.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And that goes into phenomenal, noumenal, and reality. See,
leaving all of that out, we
I can explain it actually from a solipsist point of view.
When we're driving along and going around a curve in the road, we have an imagination of what is around the corner, especially if we've gone that way before. To say that it does not exist until I've gotten around the corner.
No, that's not what I'm saying. The corner exists as soon as you said to yourself, does the corner exist?
I didn't
The
say
corner, the
no,
corner is an idea.
the
Your father is an idea. It
corner.
only exists in your head.
I didn't say
In your, go ahead.
corner exists. I was saying what when one is driving along and the road is curved and one has a belief as to what they're going to see when they go around the curve.
Okay.
Um,
What's that belief? It's a belief that there's a store around the curve.
okay.
The store cannot, you can't have that belief unless you're thinking about it.
No, but suppose you're not thinking about it. The store no longer exists.
You can't, you cannot have the intent to go to the store around the corner unless you're thinking about the store.
I wasn't.
Well, what do you mean by thinking? Let's start there. What do you mean by thinking?
I wasn't going to the store.
Wherever you were going, whatever destination you were there. So you're absolutely right. When
It doesn't have to do with the destination. It's when I go around the curve, whether I previously imagined what's around the curve or not, I would say still exists, whether I previously imagined it or not before I see it.
it's impossible.
Really.
And it's impossible. Not only is it impossible from an argumentative point of view, it's even impossible to even show with any degree of evidence, including proofs.
Yeah, the evidence is the predictability. And
but the predictability is happening in your phenomenal. It doesn't has this is the constantly, I think, an idea that I'm going to start objecting to when I keep hearing it. The assumption that's always made about something exists, it's implicit. It's taken for granted. Something exists outside the phenomenal. That is absolutely can't be argued to be true, and it certainly can't be shown by any type of evidence to be true, because all that exists is a phenomenal. When you drive around the curve, what exists is the curve and anything else that's going on inside your phenomena. Nothing else. When you drive around the curve and there's suddenly the perception of the bird comes into existence.
yeah,
Russia doesn't exist, Australia doesn't exist, your wife doesn't exist.
I think that is a non-optimal way of thinking. I think that if one actually thought that way, well, nothing exists unless I'm perceiving it or thinking about it, that is going to lead to bad results.
It's what you just described is impossible. Cannot think of something without thinking about it. You cannot not think about something.
I don't understand how that fits in. Something goes wrong in our communication here.
I think I'm really sticking to the idea of the phenomenal in our discussion. You can't. You've made the objection. You kind of said that. Well, hold on a minute. It's non-optimal to think things don't exist. That's impossible. That's like saying,
what's impossible?
It's impossible to not think about something. It's impossible not to not think about something. You can't say it's non-optimal not to think about something and not to consider something existing, because you can't. It's the question is it's what's that word? It's a non sequitur. It can't happen. You have to think about something to think about something.
Yeah,
something has to exist to thinking about something and it existing they're synonymous. I guess maybe it's another word of saying it. It's an idea. If everything is happening in your subjective model, it's an idea.
I think that's where there is a significant difference between you and myself. I don't think that you even live according to the belief that your wife exists only when you see her.
I have no choice but to live that way. I don't even know it, but in hindsight, I certainly do. Do you follow that? Do you follow that argument?
No.
Let me put it this way. My wife's existence is an idea. Okay. That idea, the medium of that idea, the quality, the medium of that idea are thoughts. Okay. If the thought is not in my head and that idea can't exist, therefore the idea is it doesn't exist.
When I posed the question to you, I started before I ever said anything to you, thinking about your wife. Did your wife exist then?
I'll say it again. Let me try to say it a different way, because I keep saying it a certain way, you're not getting it. So let me try to think about another way of saying this. It is impossible to pose the question. Maybe this will work. It is impossible to pose the question about my wife's existence without thinking about it.
I was thinking about it.
Only in hindsight. This is my point.
No, I was thinking about it before I asked the question.
In hindsight.
No.
Oh, wait, okay. Now I could definitely show this. Are you saying to me that that something that my wife's the idea of my wife's existence was in your that you thought of my wife? What you're saying is you thought of my wife's existence before you thought about it. That's
no.
It's not possible.
No, I didn't say that.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what you were implying. You said it was in my head.
I was asking you whether before I had said anything to you and I was thinking about your wife,
right?
Was your wife, did your wife exist?
I don't understand why. I'm not communicating something properly here. What is missing?
Why can you not answer the question?
Because the question is a trap. Because the question is a non sequitur. Your question makes no sense.
It does.
Let me say that I believe the question makes no sense.
It has to do with the word exist.
No, it doesn't have to do with the word exist. Well, it doesn't have to do with the word exist.
You and I have different meanings of the word exist.
No, it doesn't have to do with exist. It has to do with the idea okay, well, maybe it has a little something to do with exist, but I think it's more profound than that. I think it has to do with or maybe existence, but also is it possible to think about something without thinking about it? It's just, that seems more what it is to me. But okay, so that's the harder question. Let's go with existence then. If everything is contained within this, like I'm arguing, this phenomenal, which contains the objective and the subjective model.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I don't agree.
Okay, so if
Every,
well, yeah,
what do you mean
that's
everything?
if the subjective model and the objective model is contained within something I would call the phenomenal.
Yeah, but
Okay.
you didn't define the phenomenal yet.
Well, I mean, the phenomenal is the best way to describe it would be your perception. Let's just call it that.
Well, I
So
believe things exist even if I'm not perceiving them.
how do you show that? That's something that, I mean, Bill, if you could show that, you win the Nobel Prize in philosophy. How can you show that?
I doubt it.
You know what I mean?
You could ask me where something is that I had not been thinking about, and I could come up with an answer. And that would be a prediction that if I went to a particular place, that's where it would be.
Let's take what you just said more exactly about what's happening here. You said, I'm gonna tell you about a place I wasn't thinking about. Would that be a fair reflection of what you just said?
I don't think so. I'm not sure that you
All right.
follow.
Well, I say that. Then say what you said again. So you gave an example. I think you said, I can tell you about a place I wasn't thinking about. That's what I thought you said.
Well, no, I think we lost the original idea here.
Let me just talk about what happens when you say, I'm going to tell you about something I wasn't thinking about. I'm going to tell you about the front of Whole Foods, okay, that I can't see because I'm behind the back. So what happens is the idea of Whole Foods pops into your head. And then you imagine the front of Whole Foods.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To say that Whole Foods existed, I'm not saying Whole Foods didn't exist when it popped into your head, but within your subjective experience, let me just, because I can't use the word phenomenal because you're objecting to it. Within your subjective experience, okay, it did not exist.
Oh, I wasn't saying that. See, here's the problem is how you and I are using the word exist. You're using the word exist, defining it as meaning that you're perceiving it or thinking about it. And for me, it's know that there is a reality that is far bigger, so to speak, than my perception of it and beliefs about it.
This doesn't have to do with existence. This has to do with something else.
Yeah, but you're saying that Whole Foods does not exist unless you're thinking about it.
This has to do with the idea that.
And by the way, what was your when were you anticipating that we would be stopping?
I texted my wife. I said I'll be there between 6:15 and 6:30. Can you go that long?
Well, I walk.
No, Bill, this is important, your health. Go. I want you to walk.
I don't have to leave right now.
Okay.
But
6 o'clock, 10 minutes, 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go at 5, 10 minutes. This has to do with the idea of, I don't think this has to do with existence. I think you and I are probably on this, at least on the same page with that.
Not the way that I'm hearing it.
I think so. I think if we really fleshed it out.
Saying that things don't exist unless you are perceiving them or thinking about them. And I think that
no,
it is an existence and we have only a partial perception of or set of beliefs about it.
No, I'm thinking, no, the idea is because I would kind of agree with that, what you just said. The idea is, maybe if I use, how about this?
Okay.
No, to say you can't know. What I was going to say is, I was going to say, can you know that it exists? But that's not, in hindsight, thinking about it, well, that's not accurate.
Yeah, the word know, K-N-O-W.
Yeah, that's not a good word. That's not a good word. What the problem is, I think, is the idea that, is it possible to, the only word I can think, is it possible to think about something without thinking about it? And I think the answer to that would be no, right?
Well, by definition.
So if that's the case, it's really impossible for you to consider that my wife existed before you were thinking about it, because that's not possible.
Why?
That's my point.
Why?
Because it's not possible, because you can't, because of what I just said. But you can't think about something without thinking about it.
You're making the assumption that it is necessary to perceive something or think about it in order for it to exist.
Well, I think I just may have shown a strong argument. I think I might have figured out how to do it.
Okay.
I just lost it. It's what I just said. At least it's a starting point. It's a foundation we can build upon, and we can argue about it and subject it to scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
So we just said that we cannot think about something without thinking about it. So if we said that's true, can you think about something without thinking about it?
That's just by definition.
Wait a minute. So, okay, let's just take that for a minute. I would argue that's factual. How do you think about something without thinking about it?
Well, if you are thinking about something, you're thinking about it. That's a tautology.
Okay. But that tautology is representative is accurate of human psychology and human perception, don't you think?
It's meaningless.
It's what?
It's meaningless. I could say an ABBA is an ABBA. Okay.
Right. So I guess you could say it's meaningless, and that's my point. So if you can to say, therefore, if that statement is meaningless, then I would claim it's also meaningless to claim that I can know when my wife exists when I'm not thinking about her, because it's not possible to do that. It's not possible. You can never, my wife can never be experienced without me thinking about her.
It's how you are using the word exist. You're using it in a different way than I. You're equating existence with being perceived or thought about.
No, not really. And that's more subtle than that, because I'll grant that. I will grant that when I'm thinking about my wife, everything you just said about reality and knowing reality, that's all is true.
I could be thinking about something and believing something and it not be so, not exist. I could believe that something existed and it would not exist.
But that's why this is not about existence. This isn't really about existence. This is about...
But that's what we've been talking about, whether your wife exists when you're not thinking about her.
But if you remember, when you asked I objected to even the question. And I'm objecting to the question on the basis of the tautology that you just said. That's meaningless.
Well, I don't think it's not meaningless to me. And I think the
Yeah, of
vast
course.
majority of people, it would have meaning for them also. Do you believe that President Trump exists even when you're not thinking about him? Yes, of course he does.
But it's not possible for you to think about Donald Trump without thinking about him.
That's a different issue. That's not
No, what it means is
doesn't have
that
to do with existence.
here, what it means, let me just add one other quick thing. What
Uh-huh,
it means, I propose,
uh-huh.
is that you are completely imagining Donald Trump's existence when you're not thinking about him, because it is not possible for you to think about Donald Trump without thinking about him.
Well, I'm not imagining him when I'm not thinking about him. We're going to.
If you're not thinking about Donald Trump, you're not thinking about Donald Trump. He doesn't exist.
He still exists.
He
We're,
only he
we're
cannot
going to
exist until you think about him.
we're going to have to stop,
All right,
unfortunately.
go.
I don't think we're real close yet, but we're honing in. We're
I
honing
agree.
in on exactly what our difference in belief systems here is.
Yeah.
So
As usual, I very much enjoyed our conversation.
yeah, me too. It's very helpful. Helps me to
Yeah.
think more clearly and so on.
Yeah. I hope to soon get to the point where we can do this twice a week.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fantastic.
I'd like to do that. So please take care of yourself.
Maybe
Yeah.
maybe you can start attending Charlotte Humanianity on Tuesday evenings.
That would be good. It would be good to get other people's ideas about Humanianity too.
Right now it's inactive.
Oh.
I'm waiting for somebody like you to join.
It's coming soon.
Good.
All right, my friend. I'll see you next week.
Great.
Stay healthy.
You too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Humanity.